To be here to speak with us tonight. You've seen her read Forbes Magazine, so this is her family, and I'm looking forward to you being able to hear some of her story and hear the unique contributions that she makes to that, all while actually still pursuing really some things that she's very passionate about. I came to meet Catherine and have the opportunity to invite her to speak here through Giselle and Dr. Hazel. And they met her. Well, I'll let them tell you. Giselle, would you like to come in? Thank you.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Thank you for inviting me here tonight to present a wonderful person, Catherine. On a more personal level, Catherine is extremely special. The way I met her is very typical of how you would meet Catherine. Probably we were washing pottery, very dirty in a dig, and I'm talking about fundraising, and she said, yeah, my dad knows a little bit about that. And I said, really? Okay, so what does your dad do? She says, well, he was in politics. And I said, well, what state, do you remember that, Catherine? What state in the United States, or where exactly? She says, actually for the country. And I was like, who's your dad? And then she said, Steve Forbes, and I was like, what? So this is very typical. She just was one of us, dirty like the rest of us, working hard, didn't want anybody to fuss over her. That's why I might be embarrassing her right now, because she broke a leg at the dig. She had bed bugs biting her, didn't want to complain, and it wasn't until actually the rockets one summer were being shot over that someone called from the Netanyahu's office, who was the prime minister of the country, and said, my friend has a daughter working there. Are you sure she's safe? And we're like, who's your friend, and why are we getting a call from the prime minister's office? Well, it turned out that Catherine's father was concerned for her safety, and that's how we found out Catherine was a Forbes. So this is beautiful about Catherine, and she has connected with our family. I have girls that were young at the time, and the Clean Biles had boys that were young, and they were like Catherine and her little disciples, all the young kids, because she has a real good way with just connecting. So I can't wait to hear what she does, how she connects to adults and to young people in the business world. Catherine, thank you so much.
Thank you. Wow, I'm extremely flattered. Thank you. Thank you to Michael and Giselle. Thank you to Stephanie. Thank you to all of you for being here. As Giselle mentioned, I got to know Southern University in Israel during their archaeological digs, and I was always struck by the work ethic, the kindness, the discipline the students, the faculty, and the staff had while working amongst these not totally usual conditions. We were in mud, we were in dirt, we were having rockets fired at us. But I really came to admire Southern, the ethos of Southern, and some of my greatest friends are connected to Southern now. So who am I? Why am I here wasting your time? I am Catherine Forbes. As Giselle and Stephanie mentioned, I am fourth generation Forbes. Forbes, if you don't know, is a media company. It is started out as a magazine. I've had many different roles with Forbes and elsewhere. I've been a kindergarten teacher. I've been an operations manager in the retail clothing sector. I've been a shop assistant. I've been a field worker with archaeology. I've done quite a few things. But who am I really? I am tied to Forbes, the company. Forbes celebrates success, innovation, and purpose amongst people and business. And to put it in perspective, the voice of Forbes is quite big these days. We have 71 million unique visitors to our website every month. We have over 37 foreign language editions, and we have nearly 7 million subscribers to the print editions worldwide. We are the global champions of free enterprise, and a goal of Forbes is to humanize the world of business. Forbes also has an unspoken mission, and it's much like that of Southern's. At Forbes, we pursue truth, we pursue excellence, and we also like to honor those who give back, be it through charitable giving, charitable causes. But I'm not, and this is a business class. And unfortunately, if you came here to learn about P&Ls and supply and demand, not going to do it. I'm here to discuss how Forbes became a brand. And so let me give you a little bit of a history. My great-grandfather, B.C. Forbes, was this Scottish immigrant, came to the United States in 1904. He had a 7th grade education, but he always aspired to better himself, better his family, better his fellow man. And he first moved to South Africa, where he thought this could happen. And he had this instinctive love of business. And he also had a love of the written word. So he took a job at a newspaper, did fairly well, began a newspaper, but the market in South Africa wasn't really going anywhere. It was right after the Boer War. He realized that he'd made a mistake, one of the first of many. And so he took a boat with, I believe, as little as $5 in his pocket and came to New York City, because New York City was the place for business at the time. And he took his $5 and he got the most pristine suit he could have made. And he used whatever money was left, and he got a room in the Waldorf Astoria, because he knew in the bar, that's where all the movers and shakers in the business world would meet. And he would go down to the bar every day, and he would drink water, which for a Scottish man's unheard of. And he would listen, and he'd start conversations. And he felt he had enough to get a column going. He wanted to share what he learned with people. So he went to a paper and he said, listen, you don't know me, I don't know you, but I will work for you for free if after a certain amount of time it doesn't work out, let me go. But if it does, pay me. And he did well. They liked what he wrote. He was getting interviews with people they hadn't even thought to get interviews with. He had begun his mission of humanizing business with these stories. And he was getting a wealth of material, and he didn't have enough room for it. So he decided to take on a nom de plume, which is another name, and he went to a different newspaper and said, as this person, he said, I'm Joe Blow, whomever, I will write for you as well. So at that time, he ended up having 2 columns in 2 of the New York's top papers, under different names. And they were both successful, and it got to the point where the 2 editors would fight which of their business columnists was the better. And it turned out it was BC, both times. William Randolph Hearst heard about him, hired him, and he became a columnist for the Hearst papers and for any of their other publications. And again, he had so much information and so much he wanted to share with people that he felt this wasn't enough. And he would be a perfect blogger today. He wouldn't have started a media company. He would have been a blog on the blogosphere. And he decided in the midst of World War I to start his own magazine. And he did, and Forbes was born in 1917. And I don't know how well you know your history, but 1917 was a momentous year because Forbes was born, obviously, but also because that was the year the Russian Revolution began. And it was the year that communism prevailed, so to speak, in much of the world, and communism was exactly the opposite of what BC felt was important. BC felt people were moved forward by business. Business helped people. It was a social changer for the better. Communism had a different view of that. And so the story of Forbes played out against the whole communist revolution of Eastern Europe. The magazine was very successful at first, and it was so successful that William Randolph Hearst offered to buy it, which what for today would be hundreds of millions of dollars. And Scottish pride got in the way of prudence, and my great-grandfather said no. And he said, no, I'm going to keep this. But Hearst liked him so much. He was the only person who was allowed to do his own thing and also still work for Hearst Publications and write a column. And he was flying high. My grandfather would tell a story that first Forbes was celebrating 10 years in 1927, and my great-grandfather said, "Oh, I have this amazing present for you boys. You are going to be so happy." And the boys were thinking, there were 5 boys. Oh my gosh, we're going to get that bicycle we really want. We're going to get the radio flyer. This is going to be amazing, wonderful. And then my great-grandfather brings out the present, and it's just an envelope. And it was a U.S. savings bond. And the boys were crestfallen. My grandfather was 9 or 10 at the time, or 8. And not a few months later, the Great Depression happened. And my great-grandfather came home and said, "Well, boys, you were right. Those bikes, they're actually worth more than the bonds I gave you now. Maybe I should focus gifts towards the age you are." Forbes almost went under. Forbes almost failed during the Depression. There was no money. In magazines, you make money with advertising. There was no advertising. People didn't have the capital to market themselves. Forbes only survived because my grandfather was allowed to keep that job with Hearst. And he put all his paychecks into keeping Forbes afloat. He also had hired some pretty amazing people who believed in him, believed in his mission, and also liked having a job. So they agreed that they would do what they called a Scotch week. They agreed every 4th week they'd go without a paycheck. And it worked. Forbes worked, it survived, and it began to thrive. And it became very successful once again. So successful that the Time magazine founder Henry Luce and McGraw-Hill both decided, you can have a magazine about business. And they started Fortune and Business Week in the 1930s. And by the time World War II came around, the magazine was interesting. We had contributors, but it wasn't doing what it had once done. It wasn't exciting people the way it had. It wasn't getting the advertisers, which when you have a magazine, bread and butter, advertisers. World War II interrupted things. My great uncles and my grandfather all went to the war. My grandfather came back early because he was injured in the Battle of the Bulge. And before he went to the war, he liked publications. He had tried his own newspaper. It had failed. He tried his own magazine. It had failed. And the war was in some ways a nice relief from all this failure. He came back, and he and his brothers began working for the magazine. And they introduced new streams of revenue, because as anybody knows, in a company, you have to have revenue, capital to keep going, and did some innovation. My great-grandfather died. My great-uncle took over, and unfortunately, he passed away at a young age as well. And so then it was just left to my grandfather and 2 of his other brothers. And my grandfather was a man of ideas, a man of risk. He liked to take risks, and he decided to really shake things up. And he realized, one, that the contributor model at that time was not going to work anymore. So he started hiring editors. He started hiring teams that had specific jobs to write and research at Forbes. He started report cards at Forbes, where they would go to a business and say, you get an A, B, C, or D type thing. Even though Grandpa was not a great student, and he hated report cards as a student. He felt that was a good way to get the message in a clear, concise way across. He also was a marketing genius in some ways and a man who enjoyed life. And so he realized Forbes celebrated success. Forbes was successful, so let's combine the two. And he started his lifelong passion for collecting. And again, the Russian Revolution, he found a deal on what is known as a Faberge egg. And the Faberge eggs were the symbols of Tsarist Russia that were given to the Tsarina guests, these most intricate, beautiful jewels. And he found a deal on one. And he got one. And he first bought a little Faberge case for my grandmother, and then he got the bug. And he started collecting the Faberge Easter eggs. And he was tickled by this because here was this symbol of Russia in the United States now, and a capitalist could buy it. Not an autocrat, not, Red Russia, he could buy it. And he started using the Faberge eggs in his advertising, in his branding of the company. He then, when he died, he was very proud to be able to say right before he died, he had more Faberge eggs than the Kremlin did. So that was one of his great things. He also thought of doing things in new ways. He almost invented outside the box type of thinking. And one of the things he really enjoyed since he was a little boy was taking ships. He liked boats. He liked being on the water. And he would go to Scotland every summer, and they would take a cruise liner to go visit his father's family. And he decided, well, that was exciting. That was wonderful. Let's see how we can incorporate boat sailing with Forbes. And so he persuaded his two brothers, who soon after left the company once he started buying Faberge eggs, to buy a boat. And he would take this boat, it was called the Highlander, in homage to his father's native land, Scotland. He would take the Highlander up and down the Hudson, because we're based in New York, and he would entertain people whose money we wanted in terms of advertising. And it was a way to differentiate our brand from others. Forbes, you live a good life, you create a good life for others, you come on the ship. And it became this thing. And he was the first person to really it was in the time of the wine and dine madman time. He was taking it a step further. And when he died, the ship we ended up with was 151 feet long and incredibly beautiful. And what a joy to have in my life and to grow up with that. And so he became known for these parties he would throw on the ship. He decided at the age of 50 to start motorcycling. He loved motorcycling so much he started his own motorcycling gang called the Capitalist Tools. And he also decided to take up ballooning. And so he became one of the premier hot air ballooners in the world. He was the first gentleman to cross the United States in a hot air balloon. And he was also one of the innovators of what you see now as shaped balloons. And none of this was just for his own pleasure. Everything had to go back to Forbes. So every motorcyclist would have to have, if they came in his group, a thing that said Forbes, bright letters, Capitalist Tool. He then was able to afford an airplane, and of course he called it the Capitalist Tool. It was gold and green, and he flew everywhere with it. And he threw amazing parties, and before he died he had a 70th birthday party. He flew about 1,000 people to Morocco. He rented the Concorde. He took the Capitalist Tool. He rented a 747 and a 737 and brought the heads of business, royalty, celebrities. He was dating an actress at the time. Her name was Elizabeth Taylor. And he brought her. And he brought, Morocco was suddenly on the map. He got eviscerated for it. People started criticizing him, saying, how could you spend all this money on your birthday party? It was his 70th birthday party. How could you when there's poverty in this world and this and that and other things? And he would always say, well, it's always interesting. Once you have money, other people always think of better ways for you to spend it. But he also made the point, the party was in every publication across the world. He paid at the time, which was a lot of money, $2 million to do this. It was his own money. He didn't use Forbes's, but he used it as a capitalist tool. And he made the point that, listen, for a 30-second ad in the Super Bowl at that time period, that would have been $2 million. Why not do something everybody will remember for their lifetime, enjoy it, help a country? He had a great passion for Morocco. He was friends with the king of Morocco, and he wanted to promote Morocco. And Morocco was the first country that ever recognized the United States. And so it was, in some ways, our oldest ally. So he did things differently. Forbes suddenly became this thing. It was the place to be seen. There's a certain man who is in a certain office right now who always wanted to be on the Forbes list. And whenever he was on the Forbes list, he would have, when most people make the Forbes list, which my grandfather started in '82, it's the 400 richest Americans. Most people would call up and say, please take me off the list. I don't want the IRS to know. I'm getting a divorce. I don't want my wife to know how much I'm worth, blah, 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 blah. And then there was one person who would call with the opposite request, and showing that you can achieve anything, even if you make funny phone calls. He's now our president. President Trump would call every time the list came out and be like, listen, you're undervaluing me. I want to be higher on the list. In fact, he and my grandfather became great friends because of this, because he would be calling all the time. And Grandpa was amused. I mean, we all were amused. President Trump is an amusing person. So my grandfather, when he died with 90 motorcycles. Harley Davidson's mainly. Harley Davidson's, the head of Harley Davidson's actually thanked him for reviving the brand Harley Davidson, because he was very pro-American, very pro, what's good. He had 30 balloons, 15 shaped balloons. He had this beautiful boat. He had the plane, the capitalist tool. And before he died, he'd always said, those with the most toys may not win, but those with the most toys may have had the most fun. And sure enough, he did. His gravestone said, while alive, he lived. Now, he enjoyed life, had fun with it, but he was also something very hard worker, very disciplined. He got into Forbes. My great-grandfather didn't let any of his boys just get into the company. They all had to start in the mailroom. And in those days, the mail cage was in the bowels of the building, hot, sweaty, and you had to do things like get the cards, they had the subscription information and work on that. And he worked his way up. Granted, he did have that thing called nepotism, which helped him. And as he would like to say, nepotism is fine as long as you keep it in the family. And he did. And he brought my father on board when my father graduated from university, where he started a business magazine. My father he was at Princeton University, and he started Business Today. And Business Today is the longest published student magazine in the country. It's still around today. So my father came on board, and he started in the mailroom. If you know my father, that's very funny to see. And he worked his way up as well. And when my grandfather died, he took over. And through his term, Forbes crashed in a way unexpected. Nobody could have foreseen for two reasons. One, we had the dot-com bust in 1999, and then print, the bottom fell out of print magazines. In 2008, when we had the Great Recession, print magazines just fell through. Business Week, which had been our competitor, which had been valued at over $400 million at one point, was sold for $1. It's now Bloomberg Business Week, but that is to show you how bad things got. And things were tough. My dad had done a good job. He is not like his father. He is a stick to your nose to the ground, work, work, work. My father's a workaholic. When he took over Forbes, he built Forbes up again, and he did something with his brother that at the time people considered insane. And they divested most of the revenue that they had, most of their capital in this thing called the internet. And in 1995, they registered Forbes.com. 1996, they began building it up. And we put in most of our focus into the .com. As I said, suddenly in 1999, the .com bubble crashed, and the value of Forbes.com, so to speak, as a commodity or as a capital disappeared. We persevered. We kept putting money in, and as I said, Forbes now is one of the top 10 websites in the world for news and information. In fact, it's listed as number 4. That was great foresight, which no other magazine at the time had. No other publication. Everybody thought the print, all you had to do when you went online was just put what you put in the print magazine onto the computer. Forbes was bi-weekly, every 2 weeks. Well, how stale would that be if you went to go on the internet, went to a site, and no story would change for 2 weeks? We decided to put money and resources. We had people devoted just to the .com. And eventually, it was a separate company. We brought it back together, and it is thriving. It is thriving. Well, also in 2008, we had the Great Recession, and all of our revenue dried up. Again, as in the Great Depression, nobody wanted to put money in advertising. The only way you can have a magazine is through advertising. And so my father, along with my family members, had to think hard. And luckily, Grandpa had done some amazing things, like he had Faberge Eggs. So we started selling off the collections that we had, the balloons, the boat, the this and the that. And as somebody who grew up with all this, it was a little bit hard. And my dad sat me down and he said, listen, Catherine, we can have this amazing boat. We can have these fabulous eggs. But if we keep those, then hundreds of people will lose their jobs. And I said, I sort of went, okay, I get it now. So now today, we've since sold the majority interest in Forbes because it was just a business that we didn't have the expertise to run anymore. However, people might say that is a failure, but Forbes at 102 is still alive. 2018 was a record year for us. For 3 months, we had over 80 million visitors to the website. Revenues were up. We diversified. We have now a conference section where we create content with people coming to speak. We appease people who'd like to advertise and get their name known. And it's also a media blitz for us. We were the first company to really focus on philanthropy. About 8 years ago, we have this amazing editor. His name's Randolph Lane. And he said, Randall Lane, he said, listen, it's wonderful people are making money. It's wonderful that this is all happening. But what about the people who have made their money, continue to make money, and want to do well in the world? And so we decided to focus on philanthropic capitalism and those who have already used capitalism to make their money to help other people. And we began our Forbes 400 philanthropy issue. and conference. On the first cover, we had Oprah Winfrey, Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, and a host of other people, cover valued at nearly $300 billion worth. And all of them were either giving away most of their monies or had made huge changes in the world of philanthropy. We also decided to focus on people under the age of 30 and honor those who have done well under the age of 30. And we called it 30 under 30. And we find young people from different categories, and we bring them together in different venues, and we share ideas. It has become it's become a wonderful marketing tool, but it's also become a way to listen to your generation, a new voice, which we'd been frankly missing for some time. At the same time, we decided we wanted to hear from those loyal people who kept reading the magazine, and we started a conference business on the side of the conference business where we do the Forbes investment cruises. And those people who read the magazine actually read the print magazine, learned that we would have a cruise where people would come on board and talk to our columnists and learn how to divest their money as they get older. Retirement, talk about retirement, emerging markets. And this, if you chose to go on the cruise, you got to talk face to face with those who've been writing in the magazine, some for decades. In fact, one of our main columnists, his name is Ken Fisher. You might have seen commercials for him. He worked for us for 30 years, and he is one of our few columnists who became a billionaire listening to his own advice. And he would come and face to face, and people could talk. It was a really way to get to know Forbes as a brand, the art of business, but for us also to get to know our readers. And we still continue those. My grandfather would always say, failure is success if you learn from it. And there's always failure involved in everything. And I have had the great opportunity, I'm not saying that I'm a failure, by the way. That's one of the greatest lessons I've learned. Now, my role with Forbes, through all this family history, fourth generation, I don't work exactly with Forbes. I work with my father, Steve Forbes. And as Giselle said, Steve, my father, before all of you were born, he ran for president of the United States in 1996, and he ran again in 2000. He was on the Republican ticket. He had always had a passion for politics. As a little boy, he played, most kids would play with their doll, with their toy soldiers, doing whatever, just what my grandfather did. Dad would play politics with his toys. You won this caucus, you won this. And he got that in his blood because my grandfather actually ran for Senate, New Jersey State Senate. He won. He ran for governor. He lost. And so my dad always grew up with it. But one of the proudest moments for my grandfather was during the campaign for governor. They were having a fundraiser at the family home. And he told his boys, he had 4 boys. He said, boys, go park the cars for our guests. And the boys did it. Their dad asked them. But Grandpa started hearing some grumbling amongst the guests. And he couldn't understand, he sort of noticed this tension in the air, and finally he asked somebody. And they said, you know, Malcolm, we're very happy to support you. We don't mind donating your campaign, but to charge us for parking, that's a little much. And my grandfather was horrified, but also extremely proud that his sons had decided to become capitalists in their own right. I was born working for Forbes. I came out of the womb working for Forbes. My whole life has been devoted to Forbes. And I only exaggerate a little when I say I came out of the womb working for Forbes. At 5 days old, I was in one of our advertisements. 5 days old, I was there for a photo shoot. So it has been in our lifeblood. Any vacation we ever had, any move we ever made was Forbes related. Now, I've just talked about this amazing ship we had, and Grandpa would use the ship for advertising. We'd have 5 parties a night without advertisers, and on the weekends we'd have the big guns coming on for a day, going up to the Hudson, doing a cultural tour. You know, you'd get lunch, dinner on the ship, and then you'd get this cultural tour, Hyde Park, where Roosevelt lived, or we'd go to West Point football games. And we all, as a family, we all got to go. And yeah, it's pretty nice being on a luxury ship like that. It's actually very nice. But we had to work. And at the age of 5 or 6, we had to give tours to our guests of the ship. And there were some pretty amazing things. Grandpa put some of his motorcycles on the boat. He had a helicopter on the boat, 2 speedboats, artwork, stuff from the Titanic, stuff from Queen Victoria's yacht, pretty major stuff. And Grandpa, we had to give tours. So the first, he'd be like, this is this room, this is that room. And then I have 4 sisters, and we started competing against each other. So we had to learn everything we could about the ship. And then Grandpa would rate us and give us a report card. And at lunch, there'd be this beautiful buffet set out for people, and just delicious food. And you're 7, 6 years old, you want to eat. You want to eat. And so you run up to the table and you try to get your food. Well, my grandfather would be keeping an eye on all of us. And he literally would, I just remember once, take me by the neck and say, it is a privilege for you to be here. It is an honor for you to be here. You haven't earned your place here. You get whatever's left at the end of the meal, because these people have. And by God, that was a tough lesson. That at first didn't seem like a lesson. It was mean Grandpa. But I am forever grateful for those, because I've taken that lesson, and I've taken the lesson of always having to work for your place. And I've used it elsewhere in my life. And I didn't want to work for Forbes at first. I wanted to branch out in my own way. I was a teacher for a while. I studied history at university, but I've always loved kids, so I worked in teaching. Unfortunately, I kept getting sick, and so my doctor kept saying, you know what, you might want to give teaching up. And because as a teacher, I was not making a lot of money. I had 4 other jobs at the same time, and one of them was selling clothing at a clothing store. And when I left teaching, I just said, until I find my next thing, I'm going to work at the store. Well, working at the store ended up being a 10-year endeavor where I ended up managing stores. And I became an operations manager and was able to move to England and work for a company there. And all through that, the lessons of working with Forbes were there, where there's kindness, integrity in the work we did. Always, people are your guests. They're your fellow humans. Treat them the way you would want to be treated. And I still always had my foot in the water with Forbes. You can't not being a Forbes. When I say everything was related to Forbes, it was family vacations, everything. And I eventually came back to the United States, and my father said, listen, right now Forbes is going through a lot of changes. I need help. I don't need help at the company. I need help on my own project level. So my father, besides having a passion for politics, also had a passion for economics. And it started when playing baseball and watching baseball. He became obsessed with everybody's averages and figuring out who was doing what and what your on-base percentage was before on-base percentage became something, pitchers, he loved the numbers, and he translated that to the economy, economics. And wow, it just happened his father and family had a business magazine, so it worked out well. And economic policy. He was a writer of books. He, as I said, ran for president twice, and we campaigned with him. He failed at it. And he said, I really need help. So I came back to the States and started working, and it was right in the time that Twitter was just becoming something. And I started looking at my dad's tweets, because I couldn't believe my father An old man was on Twitter at the time, and he was on Facebook, which was bizarre. And I was looking at what he was doing, and I was saying, Dad, this isn't good. Let me help you with them. And we came up with a plan, and I became his chief Twitterer. He writes all his tweets, but I'm the one who punches them in. But I also suggest things for him. We've also developed a strategy where my dad's a voracious reader, and that is something I recommend to everybody to get ahead in this world. Every single business leader I've ever had the opportunity to meet is a voracious reader. Warren Buffett reads 6 newspapers in the morning. Who was it? Everybody, 50 books. Bill Gates reads 50 books a year. Reading is one of the things that I've noticed every successful leader does. And my father is one of them. He reads the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the New York Post every single morning. And he reads them the old-fashioned way. I mean, he does enjoy now the digital, but every single day he reads them. And they formulate a lot of his ideas. When he and my grandfather, before digital age, we would have tear sheets of things they read. Like, it was constantly ripping out of magazines, ripping out of newspapers. And so I started noticing these things, and I said, Dad, you know, people are always wondering how you get inspired. He has a column still in the magazine. What inspires you? And, you know, this magazine, this article, this, that, the other. We started to tweet what he was reading. This way, everybody knew where he was coming from, how he formulated his ideas. That's where my role in Twitter came. I had been an operations manager, so I was able to manage my father's operations. He writes books. He just did a documentary, which is still airing on PBS. It's called In Money We Trust, and I worked on it with him. And it is the story of money. One of his great passions is money and a stable currency. And he feels that people prosper when there's a stable currency. And that was the thesis of this documentary that PBS made, and it's still running. So I worked with him on that. I do the Forbes cruises. Again, not a bad gig. I get to go around the world. I get to speak to our columnists who are shaping investment advice following the markets, but I also get to speak to our readers. And our readers aren't exactly the exciting, they're not, granted, Elon Musk does read Forbes, and Bill Gates and so on, and Warren Buffett, and these great names, but these readers are the people, the mom and pops, who have started their own business, who have taken their family's business and taken it somewhere. And I get to talk to the real core of who the United States is. The everyday mom and pop, I'm making my life better for myself and other people. And get to see the world by doing it. When I was working with my father, and my grandfather, I meant to say, was a great adventurer. With the balloons, with the motorcycles, he would take them to foreign countries, and he would do what's called a friendship tour. And he would create a balloon in the shape of a national symbol. Egypt, it was the Sphinx. Germany, it was Beethoven. And he would take his motorcycle gang to those countries, and he would tour those countries. And he called them friendship tours. And he chose a lot of the countries very carefully. For example, Germany. My grandfather was wounded in the Battle of the Bulge. He did not have a great love for Germany for quite a long time. But he was bowled over by Germany's success following the war. The way Germany and the Germans had rebuilt their structures, their lives, and had become this shining city, so to speak. And so he did. He made a balloon in the shape of Beethoven and brought it over there as a gesture, personal gesture for himself, but also to say, you know, the United States, Germany, we're friends again. We can work together. He did it with Japan as well. And so, as I said, he was a balloonist. I sort of got a taste of that adventurism. I got a taste of learning of other cultures through my grandfather, and a love of history from both father and grandfather. And one summer I was working with my father, and I said, we were watching a documentary, and oh my goodness, there was this place in Israel that I'd taken a Forbes group to, as part of my job, archaeology. And through Forbes, because I can earn my money in different ways, I've now been able to focus on archaeology during the summer. I met Giselle and Michael at that site. I met my husband through the archaeology. And because it's in Israel, I've been able to use that Israel connection, which I made through archaeology, through a random chance, so to speak. And now Forbes has one of the biggest conferences held in the world in Israel. It's our 30 Under 30. Israel is the tech capital of the world at this moment. So Forbes, being on top of things, was very keen to tap into that. But through me, we were able to get a leg in. So business is an amazing thing. I've been blessed to be born into a family that has done well, but I've also seen the sacrifices they make. My father works 7 days a week. He's 72 years old and he's still working. First time my husband met my father was at my parents' kitchen table, and he was working. And my husband said to me afterwards, "Does he ever stop?" And I said, "No, he's engaged with all of us, but he's working." So there have been sacrifices. There have been failures, many failures. We've taken many licks. But I get to be here today talking to you because of business, because of entrepreneurialism, because of what the United States has provided for anybody who really wants to succeed and get ahead. The opportunities, although they're clouded, and they're not going to be fair and equal for everyone, there are still opportunities. As I said, my great-grandfather came off a ship with $4 or $5. And again, his great-granddaughter is now speaking to all of you about business. So I hope you've been able to take some lessons through my journey. And we have time for a few questions. Well, I can talk to you about Kim Kardashian. No. My father had to interview her, and that was very interesting. My 72-year-old father was interviewing her for one of our conferences, and my sister started a women's conference, and he had everybody on the floor gasping and laughing because he watched every episode of Keeping Up with the Kardashians, and so do your homework, and was able to discuss all of it, what Khloe was doing, what Kendall was doing with Kim Kardashian. And afterwards, Kim said to him, "That was one of the nicest interviews I've ever had. Thank you." And since then, the Kardashians and Jenner family have been, just shows you how good kindness and doing your homework goes. They've opened up their books to us, and that is why we were able to call Kendall Jenner one of the first youngest self-made billionaire ever. Definition of self-made varies from person to person, so take that with a grain of salt, but there you go.
Do any of you have any questions for Forbes?
Yes?
So, your life has been based around the business. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to not be so tied?
Yes, frequently. I have 4 sisters, and one sister has totally divorced herself from the whole enterprise. She is a mom living in Seattle with 2 children and doesn't even talk about it and is very happy. I can't imagine life differently because for me, family is life and life is family and family is Forbes. So it all goes intertwined together. Thank you. Thank you.
Your dad had wonderful ideas, creative ideas. I was fortunate enough to be working with a firm in '96 who actually got him on the ballot in Ohio.
Oh, thank you.
Where I was
Thank you.
practicing and so forth. So my question to you, it's not business related,
Okay.
but I have your dad's book, New Birth of Freedom.
Yes, yes,
And you're pictured in one of those on the campaign trail.
I am.
And I was just wondering, what involvement did you have with the campaign?
All right.
And for those who don't know, her dad is just an amazing
Thank you.
person.
Thank you.
And I think he's a true patriot.
Thank you.
He took a lot of his own personal wealth to promote his message, not himself, a very humble guy.
Thank you.
He took a lot of money to promote his ideas, and in my opinion, arguably in my lifetime, had the best and the most creative ideas of any candidate
Thank you.
I've ever observed. So having said all that, I was just curious what it was like as a daughter to be on his campaign.
All right, so when I was 19, I just started Princeton. Dad decides to run for president. He wasn't a politician, but he was a supply sider. He'd worked for President Reagan, which is called Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. He helped work to bring down communism in Eastern Europe. And so he was in the political sector, and he was what's called a supply side economics person. Supply sider, which is Reagan model in terms of economics. And all the candidates he liked weren't running. And somebody said, you run. And wow, he did. And so I was 19. So I went around the country. I got to see the country on a bus with my father. I got to spend a lot of time in Iowa. Got to be on Saturday Night Live because of it. My dad hosted Saturday Night Live. I got to meet amazing people all over the place, but I also got to see what my father, he's my hero, because he did believe in these economic ideas. He felt nobody was talking about it. He had the political bug, but he never thought of himself as running for office. But he felt his ideas were important enough. So he took all our money, his money, and he did what Donald Trump eventually did, and he ran his campaign without, for the most part, contributions, and to promote, as you said, thank you, not for himself, but to promote these ideas. And my sisters and I were interviewed all the time about this. 60 Minutes, Good Morning America, and said, well, what do you think about your dad taking your inheritance and spending it all on this? Aren't you a little bit bitter? And the neatest thing is, and how wonderful my family is, and how great my parents and grandparents were, none of us ever felt like he was taking our money. First of all, it was his money. He had earned it. Second of all, he was doing it for us. He was trying to make how he felt he could the United States a better place for his children, future grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. So none of us ever resented what he did, because he was doing it for us and our friends and our families. So it was a wild ride. It really was. It was insane. But
I love the Arizona primary.
yes,
I was so excited when
he won a number of primaries. He was the rock star candidate for a time being, and there was real fear that he was going to become the Republican nominee, but he wasn't, sort of as President Trump is now, part of the system. And he won the Arizona primary, which was a big deal, and it was the biggest primary, to win at that time. It was Super Tuesday or something. But the neat thing was he won it on February 24th, 1996. 6 years to the day exactly that his father had died. So it was a little bit of my grandfather smiling down and saying, you're doing the right thing.
A life of rich experiences. Let's thank her for being